All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, a lot has been made of the upturn in offense in both the NBA and the NFL. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize that one of the main reasons why the NFL and the NBA have gotten more offensive is because in order for you to try to maximize your viewership, you have to study the psychology of a society. And once you evaluate, as most psychologists or psychiatrists will tell you, once you properly have evaluated that most people in this society have a lower attention span and they require more action over the course of a program, then you know that in order to maintain your core demographics, which normally is like that age group from about 17 to 34, you have to make sure that you have, more things happening so that they can fire off a lot of the synapses in people's brains. So that's why they want more offense in the NBA and the NFL. Well, Scottie Pippen, who was known for being an all-time great defender in the 1990s, he's going to give a very surprising answer as to whether or not he likes this current style of play. So, of course, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Commissioner Adam Silver holding a press conference yesterday to announce the 2022 All-Star Game will be held in Cleveland. Right? Also talking to reporters about the new emphasis on freedom of movement and how that has impacted defense. Silver said, quote, "We had a call with our competition committee last week, which is made up of coaches, GMs, owners, players, officials, to discuss just that. And the consensus, the strong feeling within the group, was that the rule changes were happening as intended." He added, "The question that seems to be coming back from some of the coaches and players is, in essence, how much physicality will be allowed on defense? Everyone is feeling their way through. What we're hearing is the teams will adjust to wherever we end up and just want to make sure there is consistency across the league." So, Scottie, as a man who made some of his money play...
Let me say this before Scottie Pippen answers this question. Because for players who really know how to play defense, none of these rule changes are really going to affect them anyway. Because for the most part, you have a lot of players who are trying to play defense and they tend to use their hands a lot. What great defenders do is they use their feet. If you're great at moving your feet, you're going to be a great defender. Whether or not they let you use a forearm, a hand to guide the opposing player or not. If you have great feet, you're going to be a great defender.
Some of the best defense we have ever seen in the NBA. How do you feel about the new rules and the scoring surge we're seeing?
I love it.
Ooh! Whoa!
I think it's great for the game of basketball, especially when you talk about an 82-game season. I see the game has evolved now, the type of players that are playing in the game. It's an outside game. It's built around shooters, and it's a perimeter game.
I'm not really surprised that Scottie would be answering how he is, because in his day, in his prime, Scottie Pippen was a phenomenal. He was an unbelievable transition player. He was great in the transition game. As we see in these highlights, he would get blocks and steals and be off to the races. As a half-court offensive player, he was, I would say, slightly above average. But he would get a lot of his points in transition because of his great defense. And he would fit in perfectly today. He would play point forward, and he would just be unbelievable today. So I'm sure that Scottie watches the game today and how it's played, and he's saying to himself, I could have averaged 27, 9, and 9 in today's game. No problem. Because back then he was averaging 21, 7, and 7 in a far slower paced game.
Teams that have the best perimeter players are the teams that's going to have success, and I like to see the scoring. I'm a guy that, I made my living off of playing defense, but the game has evolved from that. And if I was a player in the game, you have to make a change.
So would you like this here?
I would love to be in the game and be a three-point shooter now. I mean, you know.
And Scottie was also a player who was known for the pull-up three back in that era, in the early to mid-90s, where very few players were doing that. He was known for being a player who would pull up for three off the dribble, especially at the top of the key.
I mean, three points in a game when I played was max. Yeah. You got up more than that, like you're overdoing it.
Yeah, right, right.
I mean, so
not taking those low percentage shots.
Yeah, I mean, and guys are shooting the ball now with 5 seconds. It's like you like to see players go out and score 40, 50 points, and I think that the game has embraced that now. And as a fan, you have to love it.
Love that.
What the NBA is really doing is just going back to how the game was played in the early to mid 80s. That's why I say, once again, the 80s was not a defensive era. The game started to get more defensive in the late 80s with the bad boy Pistons, and then into the early 90s. But after Jordan retired in 93, the NBA took a very heavy defensive turn that next season, and it hurt the ratings. That is why Commissioner Stern responded by moving the three-point line in. That didn't really help. So Jordan came back, and Jordan really kept the league afloat throughout the late 90s, where you had all those games 85-82 and 78-76 in those games. And a lot of these guys, they try to glorify that era, but that was not a good era for the NBA. Jordan kept it afloat. Then he retired in 98. The league really took a downturn, a down dip. So they brought Phil Jackson over to the LA Lakers to try to reinvigorate that franchise to see if they could recreate a Showtime type of atmosphere. The Lakers were able to win 3 straight championships to kind of keep the league going. And then they had Jordan come back, to bring some type of a spectacle back to the NBA while they gave their young players time to mature. Because when Jordan left, you had players in his era or of his generation like a Charles Barkley, a John Stockton, Olajuwon, Ewing, Miller, Malone, who were getting older. And they did not have the charisma or the appeal to carry the league like he did. Then you had the younger players like Iverson, Garnett, Ray Allen, Kobe Bryant, who were not ready to carry the league. They were not mature enough. So that's why they had Jordan come back in the early 2000s. And then, of course, they promised him ownership of the Washington Wizards, and they reneged. Point being is this. That late 90s, early 2000s basketball, that was not pretty basketball. There were only about 2 or 3 teams that were fun to watch in the early 2000s, like the Lakers, the Kings, the Mavericks, maybe a couple other teams. But there was way too much hero ball and way too little ball movement. So the league has properly engineered itself back to how it was in the early 80s. I think that it might be a little too offensive. Just might be just a little bit too offensive. But I think if they can get it back to where it was around 85, around that area, where you had teams that can get out there and get you about 110 points a game, that's around what you want. But you don't want teams out here leading the league and scoring at 99 points a game.
And here's my thing. People say that because everyone's scoring, that means defense doesn't matter. Quite the opposite. It means now more than ever, we need smart defenders, guys who know how to be in the right place at the right time. And
absolutely. In other words, use their feet, not their hands.
Defend without using their hands.
Ding. And that's been the modus operandi for the longest time. For anyone who watches the New York Knicks broadcast or the New York Knicks telecast, Walt Clyde Frazier has been saying that since I've been watching basketball from the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, that a great defender uses his feet, not his hands.
That's why I think Scottie would be great in this era, because Scottie was a great IQ defender. He wasn't.
And go back and watch a lot of the defensive highlights of the great Dennis Rodman back when he was with the Pistons in the late 80s. His foot movement, his lateral movement was nonpareil.
Roughing people up defensively. So what we're talking about here is, and Ethan Strauss of The Athletic wrote a great piece about this, about in football they had the tie law rule, where they basically got rid of the grabbing and the holding.
Yeah, and he pointed out, they didn't actually change a rule.
They just
changed the point of emphasis, which I thought was a great point by Ethan, and it's exactly what's happened here.
And Monty McCutcheon said they looked back in film from the 90s and the early 2000s, and they said there wasn't as much grabbing and holding off ball as there is today, and that's why they said we got to get rid of that part to open it up. I was one of the people saying it's the beginning of the year. After a while, they'll swallow those whistles. But in that piece, I learned Monty McCutcheon said monthly they're getting video reviews, sending it to all the teams and all the refs and everybody saying this, it got to go.
Right.
This is good defense. And so this seems like it's going to be something here to stay. And let's be honest, like Scottie said, this is fun for the fans. People, every NBA fan base can now legitimately say, I went to a game in my team, whether they were good or bad, at least they played.
They were fun.
And I just want to say this.
Yeah.
When I played, I loved the game, but coming down and bringing the ball out and calling a play and executing, those days of basketball is done. That's boring basketball. So it's good to see the game that is fast. Guys are kicking the ball up the floor.
And Scottie's being for real when he says that, too, because he said that multiple times on this show. I've heard him say that point blank in many of his appearances on this show previously, that he didn't like that style of basketball. We had to come down and run a play in a half-court set, so on and so forth.
They're taking quick shots. That's what the fans want to see. They don't want to see the point guard that has to bring the ball back out and look at the coach and get a play.
With everyone standing around. Yeah. That's the thing that I like about the game today.
You got the other team, they done scouted you, so they calling the play out, and then now we're looking at a 95-85 game. It's I like the rule changes.
I love it. All right, we got to take.
I agree with you, Scottie. I like how they're playing today. I think they could tone it down just a little bit. I like to see them bring back a little bit more back to the basket game. Some post up, mid-range post up, like back in the late 80s, early 90s, to bring some diversity to the offense. I think they're a little bit too 3-point happy. I'd like to see more mid-range. I'd like to see more teams that if they're not hitting their 3-point shot, pump fake, get a nice little 18-foot mid-range jump shot, a little bit more post up, high post, low post. But other than that, this is better than that early 2000s stuff, man. I'm sorry. A lot of cats going to get mad at that. Oh, well. But the great Scottie Pippen has spoken. So peace.